Welcome everyone to the Coalition for Marriage YouTube channel. If you haven't joined us before, it's a privilege to have you with us. Just going to give a quick advert before we move into our main video. Had an email this week from somebody asking, do the Coalition for Marriage still do visits to organizations to talk about marriage? Yes, we do. We've done a few since lockdown has been eased. If you'd like us to come to talk at your church or at your other organization, whatever it may be, for free, we'd be more than happy to do that. Please get in touch via emailing admin@c4m.org.uk. The address should be there at the foot of your screen, and let's work out a date whereby we can hook up. Now, today's guest is one of those people you come across in life, and when you come across them, you instantly realize that they are a friend for life, and you've just been waiting to find them. Today, we're talking to Dr. Pat Fagan from the USA, originally from Ireland. And Pat is an expert, a renowned expert in the area of statistics relating to marriage and religion and family life more generally. Dr. Pat, would you like to say hello?
Hello, nice to be with you. Great here, Tony. Thanks.
Privileged to have you, Pat. Absolute privilege. The first time I heard you speak was at the Family Education Trust conference a few years ago, I think it was now. And I've been looking forward to talking to you myself since then. So it's great to have you with us today. Now, as I understand it, Pat, you've got a history of starting out as a grade teacher. You've also been a clinical therapist for family and children. You worked in the first Bush administration, as I understand it. You've also been employed by the Heritage Foundation, and now you run something called the MARI organization, the Marriage and Religion Research Institute. And one thing, perhaps we can start off on this, one thing which distinguishes the US from the UK, there are many things, of course, the US have a large volume of statistics about all aspects of people's lives. And so it's very easy for you to draw summations together around people's family life, the outcomes to do with those family lives. You've tied it in, of course, with religion and religious activity. Let's remind people straight up that Coalition for Marriage has supporters from all faiths and none, and we very much approach things on a secular evidence base, but you've got so much more evidence in the US to work with. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how that came about, maybe?
Well, I trained in Ireland. I'm from Ireland, from Dublin, grew up there, graduate school, a lot, and then came to Canada first to get more experience, then take a doctorate, and then return home to Ireland. But then that all got waylaid when I met my wife. And
as it does.
As my mother was afraid would happen, leaving Ireland a bachelor at age 25. So I trained as a clinical psychologist and loved it, working a lot with children, marriage, family. And then as I was doing my doctorate studies, I found that what government was doing was undermining family, undermining marriage. And that really upset me. And as a person in the mental health industry, if you want to call that, I said, that needs addressing. And that caused me to switch out of clinical work into public policy. And that's when I began to go back to one of my undergraduate majors was sociology. I was always intending to be a psychologist, but I had that on the side. Went back to that, and that's what I've been harnessing most, actually an integration of both. But when you're looking at a nation, you're looking at big data. But the clinical work and the psychological work was a great foundation. What we have in the US and what I tapped into is the greatest survey system in the world, by far. Now, I love some of the UK's longitudinal research. You have some excellent research, but you don't dig into, in that you never measure the frequency of religious attendance. Like yourself, I don't become confessional. I don't like to look at, for many reasons, I prefer to look at people's level of religious practice rather than exactly what they practice. And I avoid all sorts of debates and things like that. One of the things I'd like to flag all the listeners to is that the evidence is overwhelming. Man is spiritual by nature, and when he organizes that around other people and with other people, it begins to express itself in religion. So religion is a natural part of humankind, and anybody looking at history, anthropology, social science, or anything knows that. So it's an important dimension. which is under attack at present, even to look at it, which as a scientist, I find that stupid. You take in all data and you look at how it's working and what effects it has.
Can I start off asking you about the topic of the day for us, really, which is marriage, and just to start off, maybe asking you, really. So I'm playing devil's advocate here. What's the point? Hasn't marriage had its day? We don't treat women as chattels anymore. There's no sense of ownership. Why are we still bothering with the concept of marriage when there are so many other relationship types? Shouldn't we just let it go?
No, it's a plain answer. Every child.
I'm glad you said that. Let's put it that way.
Just, absolutely no. I will go further. I'd say what we're going through today across the world with these experiments with other family forms are increasing the argument for marriage, not decreasing it. The data overwhelmingly on every single measure measured, both adults and children as a group do best on everything. There's no exception in an always intact married family when the children and the biological parents form that natural integrated unit. No other family form holds a candle to that. And the data is overwhelming, and no social scientist who's any way honest can deny that. A lot of them will avoid it because they know the power of the data that I'm talking about, and they can't contend with it if they're ideological. So people will choose all sorts of other things in their search for happiness. Where children are concerned, you need to choose what is best for the child, not what is best for you. If you bring a child into existence, you now owe that child everything. He didn't ask you to bring him or her into existence. You did it. The onus is on you, not on the child. And that's where we're really going wrong. We've forgotten the child in all this. The child is never brought into the thing in all these different family form discussions. Because if you bring the child in and the welfare of the child, the game is almost over immediately.
How much of that would you say is almost like self-fulfilling and self-selecting, as opposed to, because one of the arguments is, well, it's not causational. So, people that are of that attitude tend to get married anyway. It's not that marriage makes the difference. It's self-fulfilling, if you like.
It depends on what they mean. I think we have to treat that question seriously if the questioner is treating it seriously. Some people are using that just as a way to flip it off and throw it aside. Your experience of family as you're growing up as a child shapes you very, very significantly in your capacity to choose. It won't force you to choose. But let me give you an instance. In Southeast Washington, D.C. is the poverty track. I remember years ago, some people were very concerned about the lack of marriage, the breakdown of marriage there. But family is really broken down there, and the welfare state just compounded that massively. I remember a grade school principal working with a cabinet member, trying to get the whole idea of marriage there. And she said, the principal said, look, none of these kids have ever seen a wedding. Never. Nobody in their area gets married. So in a case like that, now you ask the self-selection, what's the probabilities of such a child wanting to be married when they've never seen it? Much, much lower. It may be there because in a way it's part of nature, but massively hidden. Is that self-selection? No, you've got a whole interaction going on here. The other thing on causation, and particularly where family is concerned, causation in the social sciences has some of the same causation factors as the physical sciences, like A causes B. With this experience, you're inclined to do this. Experience this repeatedly, and you're probably going to do that. But there's another whole dimension of being human, and marriage falls very much in this area, where what is causing you to act is not what has happened to you, but what you want to pull off, where you're heading, what you desire. Like if you go to university, You want to get a degree. Well, you better work. And at times you say, oh, I better not goof off tonight or go for a drink with the boys. I better get this studied out there. I'm not going to pass the exam. And if I don't, I won't get the degree. That's the future causing the present, because we have intellects and will, and we can choose the good and pursue it. That's causation. And that's the sort of causation, actually, that is most in play in matters of family, of marriage, of love. The other is there and shapes, but this determines. And that's why a child from the poverty tract of Southeast Washington seeing marriage, or even seeing a couple who are married and enjoying their family life. And I'm thinking of a particular girl who at age 7 or 8, this began to happen to her. She became determined that when she grew up, she was going to marry. That was the future. She was choosing the future. And as human beings, that's one of the huge things that makes us very different from the apes.
And I don't know about the US, but in the UK, the trend is, if even mentioning marriage in school is to mention it merely in passing, as opposed to the thing that makes the difference for children growing up. And yet we're happy to educate our children about eating vegetables, getting exercises, to stay fit, all sorts of other things. But when it comes to the thing that really enables you above all other things to build the best version of the next generation, if you like, marriage, the thing that does that, is more often ignored.
Well, it's a very tricky thing to bring up in schools now, because children, how many children come from an intact family? There are a lot who don't. And you raise this issue, and you're immediately, the child is going to feel sad or angry. The child who isn't a member of an always intact married family with mom and dad loving each other. And then how do you, I think the best way is you don't talk about this at all. You don't teach anything whatever on the sexual in the schools, and you bring the parents in. You teach the parents how to teach.
Very good. Yeah.
Because once you get into this in the school, it's a rat's nest caused. We can get into the past causation and all the rest, but this is a tricky thing. But I am in total agreement with you. If you're going to talk about family, then you better talk about marriage as the best family. And if you're not going to talk about that, you're undermining the happiness of every child in the classroom. You got to do it wisely and prudently.
Which brings me to my next question, if you like. And again, playing devil's advocate here, if you like, what's the problem with same-sex marriage? I mean, the numbers are so few. Why not just let it go? Why do organizations like C4M and others insist on the definition being one man and one woman? Why are we making such a fuss about these things?
Depends on the person who's making the argument. Some are doing it because they want to belong within society and be accepted the same way everybody else is, and that's understandable. Not necessarily justifiable, but very understandable. I could understand that. Others are deliberately doing it because they have an ideological agenda about changing society and undermining marriage. So you can have very good motivations and really evil ones. But to get back to the issue itself of same-sex marriage, the biggest reality about same-sex marriage is it cannot produce children, period. It's not about family. The family is father, mother, and child. Now, we can construct other family forms, but that's the family, that's the full family, that's the natural family. And by the way, that's how children are born. Male and female coming together, and it's so easy. What's the alternative? Surgeries, all sorts of medical teams, all sorts of pharmacology and all the rest. The most natural way, the way man is made, is for male and female producing the child. They're the ones who love it. Everything fits into place around marriage. Everything begins to fall apart or has to get loads of extra energy to keep these other family forms together. And they don't work well. They don't work as well. And the data on that is overwhelming. So let's have a look at some of the data then. I'm going to look at just one aspect of the outcomes You could do this on education, you could do it on happiness, you could do it on all sorts of things. But for the beginning, I'm going to concentrate on health. Why? Because here we have some of the strongest data. Actually, there's in the United States, we have the National Health Interview Survey, which is huge and is done every year and looks at family structure, it looks at health. And one of the things you can analyze it by, because they ask the question, is by family structure. This chart that I'm showing here sort of gives a summary, pulling together all that had been done by around the year about 2010. And what you see here, the darkest blue there on the left-hand side is the always intact married family. Then the one beside it is the single parent, and then unmarried. This is the cohabiting. We were talking about cohabitation. There you have the cohabiting natural parents. The health of their children is nothing near as good. This is ill health, so the rate of ill health is much higher for them. The blended family, that's normally divorced, remarried, or the cohabiting family, that would be not the unmarried biological parents. And then you have the extended family where the kids are living with grandmother, etc., and then others. The others would be catch-all, which would include same-sex. Then if we go on to what I'm going to show here is the most recent data, bringing together about 20 years of the National Health Survey data. So it's a massive sample, the biggest one ever in health. And what this author did was he divided the family structures into four. You got both biological parents, then you got single parents, then you've got the step family, and then you have same-sex parents. And in each category, there's two different types. If you take the biological parents, always intact family, you have the always intact married family, and the always intact cohabiting family. That's the bottom blue. And you can see that and in each of the charts that follow, the one at the bottom is the always intact biological married family. The dark blue above that one is the same sort of family, except they never got married, cohabiting. Ill health, 30% higher. Single parents, always single. That's a mother who had a child and never married. Ill health, 19% higher than the always intact biological married parents. Single parent divorced, you can see 1.5, and so on. Step family, remarried. Then we have what I'd call the step family cohabiting. Then the same-sex married, and here among them, the health, though the numbers on these are very small, but the data is there. Among children of married same-sex parents, the rate is not much higher. But then if you look at the same-sex cohabiting, which is the overwhelming number, it's the highest of all, actually, on the ill health. Now, if we go to the next one, emotional problems, because emotional is part of the big part of the health. And there you see rather dramatic and escalating differences there on the emotional end. And the same-sex parent family actually is the one with by far the highest. Attention deficit disorder, ADD, big issue now. And you can see again here the difference that family structure makes. The last one is repeating a year at school. And there you see again, huge differences by family structure. And the same-sex parent, married. And by the way, I want to point out the Canadian census. Canada has had same-sex marriage for a long time, one of the longest. And they have the family structure data in the census. And when the same-sex marriage debate was going on in the US, the Canadian data on this very one, on repeating a year at school, you could see that kids of same-sex parents were doing much worse at school than the other family structures. That's very robust, incontestable Canadian data. It's not sample, it's the whole country. And that this sort of data be suppressed, like this piece of research, the journal that took it was standing way out on a limb. It's very difficult now, actually, to get editors, God help them, if they step outside the political correctness. They lose their job, or some of them will lose their job in the academy.
Mm.
This is not science.
Yeah, Walter Schummer's written a good book, hasn't he? I think same-sex parenting research, which it's very difficult to publish research in that particular area because not many people are willing to publish it. But he's brought a lot of it together and has dug deep into the papers away from the abstract where some of the real data shows some of the actual results.
Here we have one of the most contentious issues in our society. And what are the social scientists doing? They're closing down the science. Is that scientific? You know, they're not publishing. Rather than having a good open debate, contrasting the data, everybody can learn a huge amount about it. And from it and become wiser. You don't get wise by shutting down the debate, stopping data, and then punishing people for trying to seek good data.
The idea of our society today, try before you buy. It's interesting. I can look at Amazon, and if I want, and other shops, and if you want something sent to you to try before you buy, they'll let you do that. Why shouldn't we also do that with relationships? Doesn't it make sense to live with someone before you marry them, see if you're compatible? If you're not, find somebody else, and before you commit, you know, shop around a little bit.
Here, the data is incontrovertible. Better that you don't. But when you begin to think about the human heart, very understandable. I remember back about, 25 years ago or so, I've been at this a long time, but I remember as divorce escalated, children of divorce, and particularly women, I remember young women whose parents divorced, 100% always cohabited before marriage. And this was at a time when cohabitation was still a bit taboo. And to me, it was understandable. The girl's parents had failed in their marriage and failed that child. And she therefore was fearful. I want to test the waters with this guy beforehand. That was very understandable. It wasn't wise, but it was understandable. Today, it's gone way beyond that. It's not out of fear. It's the pro forma thing. And the data is very clear. If you cohabit, your chances of divorce escalate, not decrease. They increase.
Significantly. And in fact, there was something there was something in the Wall Street Journal 2 weeks ago, was there, indicating you're much less likely to divorce if you marry in your 20s, having not cohabited beforehand. You're
exactly.
Much more likely to stay together, statistically speaking, much more likely.
Actually, man is made to be monogamous, and woman. And actually, you see that come out very, very quickly, even in the teen years. Like if a guy falls for a girl and the girl responds, the immediate expectation is exclusivity. You know, it's impossible to have a romantic relationship between a man and a woman and it not be exclusive. That's built deep into human nature, and that's there right from the beginning. That's harder to hold on. It's very easy in the beginning when, you know, boy meets girl, and when it gets into a marriage that's 30 years old, well, there's a maturity needed. There's a whole rediscovery needed. There's a lot of hard work sometimes needed. But still, the monogamy is always better. And for the child, it's a slam dunk. For the children of the family, incontestable.
Yeah. And then you've mentioned a couple of times divorce, and sometimes with the best will, abuse, abandonment, adultery, things don't work out, divorces take place. So when that happens, shouldn't we allow no fault divorce? Shouldn't
Absolutely
we
not.
You know, the quickest way of getting out of it, the best?
No fault divorce in the United States. I don't know what it's like in the United Kingdom.
Well, we're just about to enact formally. It's
a travesty of justice. God help. And it's the men, not solely the men, but overwhelmingly the men who are just trampled into bits and ground into bits by the family court system. There is no justice. There's no presumption of innocence. There's an immediate presumption of guilt. It's so evil. I can't find the words strong enough. And I hope England is not digging deeper into that sort of system.
Well, I'm afraid we have.
Well,
the laws have been passed. It's about to be instigated in England in the very near future.
There are lawyers who are going to make millions by just raiding the wealth of the families.
I think that's a really interesting point, because something which struck me over here is that the legal system almost seemed completely behind the push for no-fault divorce. And when you look back, and for years, the courts and the legal system were obliged to try and keep marriages together. But when you look at the reality of that, they never seem to try at all.
Anybody who's dedicated to that family law system is an enemy of every child in the country. They do it in the name of the child. Now, I'm not saying there aren't bad families where protection is needed. Of course there are, and you need strong law and all the rest, but the system, as its family court system, it doesn't operate that way at all. It uses that.
And the idea seems to be to get through the cases as quick as possible, rather than as fairly as possible, let's say.
Yeah. No, I have treated in my clinical days families where there is abuse. One of the things, by the way, that I find very objectionable is that people say, look, once there's infidelity or abuse, game over. That's not true.
That's the argument used for those who would support.
Yeah, and everybody accepts it.
Yep.
Clinically, I know that's not true. It's very difficult, but it's very possible if both want it. It's impossible if only one wants it. Very possible if both want to restore a marriage, no matter how bad it is. And I have done it, and I'm not brilliant. I'm good. I was good at it, but I'm not the most brilliant therapist ever in the world.
The change in approach is all part of this, which you referred to in various talks I've heard you. The concept of the cultural revolution and the change that is taking place. Is that just, and again playing devil's advocate, Pat, is that just sophistry for people who support marriage, not willing to recognize that society is just changing? Is there a cultural revolution actually taking place? What's going on?
Well, the cultural revolution has been taking place. I think it's been very successful. And in a way, the revolution is over because the massive damage is done. And there's a huge portion of people formed in a way that they're going to play out their lives in ways that are going to cause them a lot of unhappiness. And we can see that, like the rates of divorce have massively increased. The rates of abuse the rates of the abuse of women and the trafficking of women, they're just gone through the roof. Like there's massive damage done. The revolution is not totally over, but by gum, it has won. Now, how did it get there? Well, I think you got to start back with the French Revolution. That was the beginning. There's where you had the attack on both marriage and religion simultaneously. And Marx and Engels continue the same. Marriage, family, and religion, the two big obstacles to international socialism. Lenin put it in place, caused chaos in Russia, so they quickly backtracked, actually. But then he exported it, and then the intellectuals got involved, and then you get the Frankfurt School, and you get the Gramsci, and so on into academia. And they have been extremely successful and have won.
You got to ask why, Pat. I mean, why do it?
It's interesting. I found in reading the biographies of some of the radical feminists of the United States, the ones who started the National Organization of Women and the Women's Studies program, which are anti-male, anti-patriarch, all that lingo comes out of that. And these are pretty brilliant women, highly educated and very intelligent. But they had fathers. The 6 biographies I read of 6 of them, they had fathers you would not want to visit on anybody on earth. Yeah. I understood how they hated their father and then spew that out to hatred of men. Yeah. You have that, but then what did that fuel? That fueled an anger and a destructiveness that they brought through their intelligence and smarts and savvies to a whole societal level of destruction. And that's what these women have done, and others. They're acting out their anger, and anger is destructive and essentially evil if not contained.
And what about fatherlessness in general? It's
a pandemic. In the United States, overall, only 46% of those ending their childhood, age 17, only 46% are in an always intact married family. the vast majority of cases, it's the father who leaves or is kicked out by the woman. Actually, in divorce, it's over 70% of divorces are initiated by the women, not by the men. And then among African Americans, only 17% at age 17 are in an always intact family. American Indians, 24%, Hispanic, 40%, whites, 52%, and Asians, 64%. Our strongest ethnic group in the United States is the Asian family. So we have a real pandemic of the breakdown of the family. You know, attachment to dad is very important for both the boy and the girl, so that they're capable of channeling their sexuality and not being led by it, so that they lead it rather than being led by it. And dad's role is absolutely critical.
Are there more slides you'd like to tell us about?
I want to use this analogy. This here is a topographical map of the United States made up of tiles. Actually, it's fascinating, which gives you the peaks and valleys. You get a sense of that's the Rockies, and that it's exaggerated a bit in the map, but just to get the idea across to the viewer of peaks and valleys. Well, if you look at the strengths and weaknesses of the citizens of the United States on different things, and that's what essentially the social sciences demographically do, to say, how are we doing on this? Well, you know, this group of people doing very well, these not doing too well, so you get peaks and valleys. The source of the data is incontestable. This one here, we're going to look at the average, this is US students, their data on English and math scores, the grade point average. This is the average by family structure. And you see the intact married family stands out on this as it does on everything else. This actually is a picture of kids in the United States. I bet you it's much the same picture, slight differences always, but much the same picture is going to happen for the UK, for France, for Germany, for Australia. Yes, human nature is much the same. Now we're looking from the same survey at the same kids this time, and this is going to blow the minds of most viewers because they don't see data like this. Same kids, same data, but this time we're looking at it by frequency of religious practice, no matter what their religion, Protestant, Jew, Muslim, Catholic, Buddhist, all lumped in here together. The kids in the United States who go to church weekly are the ones who have, on average, the highest grade point average. And I bet you the same holds in the United Kingdom. Then you see for a couple of times a month, you have a significant drop. Then a couple of times a year, less than monthly, a couple of times a year, and then never. Now, when you put the two of those together, because it's the same survey, and I take the extremes, what I'm taking here is the intact married family that worships weekly. And the kids, the teenagers in that, they get the highest grades. The intact married family that doesn't worship at all, that's the other blue one, 2.7. So they never worship, but they're intact married. Now, the red ones at the back, they're the other forms of the family where there's fracturing there somewhere. Mom and dad are not together, biological mom and dad. So what you have there, the non-intact who worship weekly, and their scores are the same as the married. And then the ones who do worst are the broken family that doesn't worship at all. Yeah. And that holds on everything. I'm going to show you from that same survey, one of the great sociologists went in and said, well, look, what happens to the poor? Does this, and actually the poor in the United States do better even than the middle class when they worship weekly. Like religious practice is one of the greatest strengths for the poor. And actually there is nothing, I was Deputy Director of Social Services Policy in the United States, looking over all the evaluation data, etc. There's nothing anywhere in any government program that can deliver this sort of result, this sort of change.
I'll ask the point which others critics will ask. How much of it, again, is causal? How much of it is people that are more likely to help their kids at home might be more likely to go and do an act of collective worship on a Sunday?
Well, what does that matter?
Well, I don't know.
What does that question mean?
That's often the question that gets asked.
From a public policy and a national debate, the question is meaningless. Mothers who are inclined that way and do that for their kids, These are single mothers, poverty track, inside poverty track in the United States.
Yep.
You get results like that.
Because you're not comparing well-off families with poor families. You're looking, this is poverty track, isn't it?
This one here is
Yep.
comparing
Yep.
middle-class families
Yep.
with poverty track families.
Yep.
And the middle class, actually, you can see low church attendance.
Yep.
High church attendance, actually, it decreases for that.
That's interesting.
Now, that's not positive. What it's really showing here is that for the poor, this makes a massive difference. For the middle class, it doesn't, because they have so many other benefits.
Yep.
The poor have access to religion. They don't have access to museums, to great libraries, et cetera, et cetera.
Computers, all
So,
that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So I'm just going to go looking at that by those 4 forms of family structure and religion combined. Receiving a high school degree, you can see it there.
Yeah.
Next one is being very happy, a robust measure, and you can see the outcomes there. Had an abortion.
Wow, look at that.
Smoked, drank, used marijuana, the drugs, the gateway into drugs.
Yep.
And this is among teenagers. From the data, you can look at addictions, depression, teen sex, depression, anxiety, health. You get the same overall pattern, not always with the same gaps between them. Now, I want to, going into some other data, and this we talked about. This is from the National Survey of Family Growth, which is one of the biggest survey in the US tracking these sorts of things. And what we're looking at here is the probability of divorce 5 years after marriage, depending on the number of sexual partners the person has had up to the time of their marriage. And those who've only had one sexual partner, by the way, the red line are men and the blue line are women. The individuals who've only had one sexual partner, you can see men and women are almost the same. If they've only had one and they're married, that means it's each other. So they've never had anyone else. They're monogamous in the full sense of the word. 5 years later, 95% of them are still going to be married. If the woman had one sexual partner prior to the marriage, it drops from 95 down to 62. And with 2 extra partners, it's 50. And then it plateaus.
Wow.
That's huge. It takes the men about 5 partners to get to the same level. And there's a slight drop, actually, when you get up to 10, there's a slight drop. But the real big impact are the first 2 partners. And women, the biggest drop is even having one. Yeah. I think every parent, every teenager needs this chart. Its implications for their future are huge. And for the future of the grandchildren, like parents, your access to your grandchildren is going to be massively modified by whether your kids have sex before marriage. Now, the amount of people who arrive at marriage never having had sex with anyone else, any other person, is now very, very small, even among weekly church-going Christians. Very small. The majority of weekly church-going single Christians, Catholic and Protestant, is they've had 2 sexual partners already. So that divorce be very high among them, human nature. It's very, very interesting. The next one we'll have a look at here, this is for teenage girls, using the same survey. Actually, we were talking about the grade point average. You can see teenage girls in the Always Intact Married Family Worship Weekly, much less likely to be sexually involved. They do, some of them. And then you can see what's happening in the other family configurations. That there gives you a fair idea of the sorts of things you can get in the data of the social sciences. I had here, actually, this is the US. I was looking at the timeline you asked about the Cultural Revolution. The bottom line is a bit small, but we're really looking at from 1950 to almost the year 2000, or mid-1990s, when Playboy started, the pill when it came in. I was looking at a number of other things, but then Supreme Court decisions, federal policies kicking into place, etc. The biggest crisis facing humanity is the depopulation. I think I have some data on that. Yeah, if you look at the world, these are the big depopulation parts of the world. Europe, which is disappearing, Russia, China. South Korea is the basket case of the world. Booming economy, Christianized massively, but the lowest fertility rate is 0.9 children per couple. It's crazy. Australia, the United States, And the whole world actually is heading towards a fertility crisis. This is the global, or that red line, you can see 2019. I estimate, just carry that trend line forward, by around 2035 to 2040. In that period, global fertility rate will drop below replacement. But already, and for a long time, the OECD countries, all the developed countries, their average fertility is 1.5, 1.4 to 1.5. They are disappearing. The only single thing that makes a difference long-term, globally, very interesting, is weekly worship across all religions, across all cultures, across the whole globe.
That's interesting.
Across the globe, women who do religious practice in whatever their faith is weekly, on average, have 3.4 children. Women who don't worship at all, on average, have 1.4. It's the only thing in the social sciences that I've been able to come across that makes a huge difference. Who knows how it's going to play out? But it'll be our grandchildren who'll begin to see the effect. Growing economies need growing populations.
Well, you're doing your bit, so well done there. I've got 4 kids. I'm not doing as well as you, but I'm doing my bit anyway. I got to thank you for that, Dr. Fagan. I mean, it's just amazing stats there from an awful lot of data, large data sets over significant periods of time, giving very, very conclusive results. What on earth do we do? How do we get the culture back, if you like? How do we reinculcate the value of marriage back into society?
Well, I think actually it's got to start, it has to be a bottom up again. All across the globe, I think it's going to be families who have their act together, couples who have their marriages together. Others around them are going to notice. And they're going to see, my marriage is not terribly happy. As a matter of fact, it's broken and my kids aren't thriving that well. How do you do what you do? Like, whatever Kool-Aid you're drinking, I want to drink it. I think that's how it's going to regrow from the bottom up. I made the mistake in moving out of clinical psychology into public policy to try and get Congress to act differently. I had the assumption that if they saw the data, they would go after the good.
Yep.
It was a total waste of time. I have given up on politicians by and large. Not that we must keep doing that, but don't expect that to deliver the change you want. As citizens, we must keep presenting the truth. We need organizations to present to Parliament, to present to Congress. So where do you start? With your own family, then with your friends, with your kids, with your school. Schools are key. Schools are absolutely key. If there's one public policy worth fighting for, is the freedom of schools, that parents alone run the schools, select the board, and they have the money to do it.
Sore point in the UK, I might add.
I know it's a sore point. It's a sore point all over. But once you deprive parents of the control of the education of the kids, you've given it to someone else, and the someone else at present is wrecking our kids. Parents are the ones who love their kids.
And that's the thing, isn't it? Yeah. The family unit is the best example of devolved government there is, you know, and it's autonomous and it works and it's self-fulfilling. And I think if you're in a society which is ignoring truth, the only option you've got is to hold on to power, and autonomous, self-secured families are a threat to power. If you want to change society, if you want to control society, the thing that's going to get in the way is well-structured families. And that's the thing you need to go after. And arguably, that's exactly what's happening. You've a very illustrious career. You've done so many wonderful things, and you've contributed in such a marvelous way from a data point of view, and almost the Irish-American Jordan Peterson in terms of your clinical contributions and your therapeutic input there, which is fantastic. But taking all that all together, what would you say is the one lesson you've learned and the one thing you would pass on for people to capture? Is it just live your family life in the best way you possibly can, or is there anything else you'd add?
Take care of your marriage and raise your kids that they are going to take care of the most important thing in their life, and that is the happiness of the person they're going to spend the rest of their life with. That they got to be prepared to serve the other.
Yep. And that's,
guide
again, that's
government.
something we haven't gone into at all, the covenant aspect of marriage, and perhaps another time, but the covenant versus the contract, and your commitment to something outside of yourself, greater than yourself, bringing the past, fulfilling it into the future, and fulfilling your obligation, not your desire. Absolutely. Yeah. Great stuff. Great point to end it. I'm so grateful for the work you've done, for the work you're doing. Look forward to speaking to you. Perhaps we'll have a seminar at some point, and we can get a lot of our viewers to join in and send in questions for you, because I think your work should run and run and run. I think it can and should make a great big difference to government. If not that, it can encourage individuals to stand up and speak up for marriage, and even to get involved in the civil process, in their schools, in their local constituencies, whatever they can do to stand up and have an effect, and to make a difference, and to reinculcate marriage and its benefits back into society. Dr. Pat Fagan, it's such a privilege to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time.
It's been great being with you, Tony. Thanks a million.